You have 30 seconds to tell me why I shouldn't let you lose everything you thought you owned." The words hung in the air of the law office, and Isabella's perfectly manicured fingers trembled against the mahogany table. Across from her, the woman she'd spent months treating like hired help sat with quiet dignity, no longer the pushover she'd convinced herself she was dealing with. Sometimes the universe has a funny way of teaching lessons about respect. Sometimes karma doesn't wait for the afterlife to balance the scales. Sometimes the people you underestimate turn out to hold all the cards you didn't even know were in play. My name is Betsy Coleman, and this is the story of how I went from being humiliated in my own home to watching my son and his wife beg me to save them from the consequences of their own cruelty. Picture this. The woman who demanded I serve her tea on silver trays, literally on her knees in a lawyer's office, pleading with me to undo what she'd set in motion the day she decided I wasn't worthy of basic human dignity. But before I tell you how it all unraveled for them, let me ask you something. Have you ever loved someone so much that you'd let them break your heart just to see them happy? Have you ever given everything you had, only to watch the person you sacrificed for treat you like you were nothing? If you have, then you know exactly how this story begins. And if you haven't, well, stick around because this is about to be a masterclass in what happens when kindness gets mistaken for weakness. If this story hits home for you, I hope you'll take a moment to let me know in the comments. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, because what happened next changed everything, and I have a feeling you're going to want to see how this plays out. But let me start from the beginning, back when I still believed that loving someone meant accepting whatever treatment they decided you deserved. I was 58 years old when this all started, a woman who'd spent 35 years building a life with Alan Coleman, the kind of man who believed actions spoke louder than words and who showed his love through the steady work of his hands. We'd raised our son Harry together, pouring everything we had into giving him opportunities we'd never had. Alan worked construction, I ran a small catering business from our kitchen, and together we'd managed to buy a beautiful 4-bedroom house in a quiet neighborhood where Harry could grow up safe and loved. Alan had always been the planner between us. While I focused on the day-to-day details of raising Harry and building my business, Alan thought about the future. He worried about what would happen if something happened to him, about making sure Harry and I would be taken care of. He spent hours researching trusts and estate planning, something I'd always figured was for rich people, not folks like us. "Betsy," he'd say, sitting at our kitchen table with papers spread out in front of him, "I want to make sure this house stays in the family, but I want to make sure you're protected too. Some of these trust documents I've been reading about, they have clauses that protect people from being mistreated or taken advantage of." I'd laugh and wave him off. "Alan, who's going to mistreat me? Harry loves me. When he gets married someday, his wife will be like the daughter we never had." Alan would just shake his head. "I hope you're right, baby. But I've seen too many families torn apart when money and property get involved. I want to make sure you always have choices." Looking back now, I realize Alan knew something I was too naive to see. Love doesn't automatically create respect. Good intentions don't guarantee good treatment. And sometimes the people closest to you are the ones most likely to take advantage of your kindness. When Alan died suddenly of a heart attack 3 years ago, I was devastated. Not just emotionally, though the grief nearly broke me. Practically too. Despite his planning, despite the trust documents he'd set up, I felt lost and alone. Harry had graduated college 2 years before Alan's death and moved across the country for his job in marketing. After his father's funeral, he stayed for a few weeks to help me get my bearings, but eventually he had to return to his own life. I understood, but it left me rattling around in that big house by myself, missing Alan's steady presence every single day. That's when I threw myself into my catering business. It became my lifeline, my way of staying connected to people, of feeling useful. I specialized in comfort food, soul food, the kind of cooking that brought people together around tables and made them feel loved. Church dinners, wedding receptions, family reunions. I built a reputation for food that tasted like home and service that made people feel like family. For almost 2 years, I thought I was doing well. I thought I was healing. I thought when Harry called me 8 months ago to tell me he'd met someone special, that everything was finally falling into place. "Mom, her name is Isabella, and she's amazing," Harry had gushed over the phone. "She's got this grace about her, this elegance. She comes from a good family, went to private schools, knows how to handle herself in any situation. I can't wait for you to meet her. The way he talked about her, I could hear how smitten he was. Isabella this, Isabella that. How she'd grown up in Manhattan. How her family had connections in high society. How she was used to a certain standard of living. Part of me felt proud that my son had found someone he clearly adored. Another part of me wondered if this elegant, sophisticated woman would have anything in common with a working-class widow from our quiet neighborhood. But I pushed those worries aside. This was my son's happiness we were talking about. If Isabella made Harry happy, then I would love her too. That's what mothers do. 2 months later, Harry called again with even bigger news. Mom, Isabella and I are engaged. I know it might seem fast, but when you know, you know. We're thinking about a summer wedding. 6 months. They'd known each other 6 months, and were already engaged. But I could hear the joy in Harry's voice, and I pushed down my concerns about the rushed timeline. The wedding was small, held at Isabella's family's country club 4 months after their engagement. I'd offered to cater it, thinking it would be my gift to them, but Isabella had politely declined. Oh, that's so sweet of you to offer, she'd said when Harry mentioned it. But we've already booked the club's catering team. They're really the only ones who understand our vision for the event. I'd felt a little sting at that, but I'd brushed it off. Different families, different traditions. I bought a nice dress, showed up with a smile, and watched my son marry a woman who was undeniably beautiful and poised. Isabella looked like she'd stepped out of a magazine, all golden hair and perfect posture, comfortable in a way that spoke of years of private schools and country club memberships. During the wedding reception, I'd tried to connect with her family, but the conversations felt strained. They were polite enough, but there was a distance there, a sense that they were looking right through me. Isabella's mother, Patricia, had spent most of our brief conversation asking about my little catering business, in a tone that made it clear she didn't consider it a real profession. How charming, she'd said when I described some of my recent events. It must be so fulfilling to work with your hands like that. The way she'd said it, like I was a craftsperson they'd hired for entertainment, had made my cheeks burn. But I'd smiled and nodded, and told myself it didn't matter what they thought of me. What mattered was Harry's happiness. After the honeymoon, Harry and Isabella had planned to stay in Seattle, where Harry had been working successfully for 2 years. But 3 months ago, everything changed. The company downsized, Harry's position was eliminated, and suddenly they were scrambling to figure out their next move. Mom, Harry had called me, sounding stressed in a way I hadn't heard since he was a teenager worried about college applications. Isabella and I are going through a rough patch. The job market is tougher than we expected, and we're burning through our savings faster than we planned. I know this is a lot to ask, but would it be possible for us to stay with you for a few months while we get back on our feet? My heart had leaped at the question. Harry, home again. A chance to get to know my new daughter-in-law. A chance to have family in the house again, to cook for people I loved, to feel needed. Of course, I'd said without hesitation. Stay as long as you need. This house is too big for just me anyway. I'd spent the week before they arrived getting Harry's old room ready, making sure the guest bathroom was stocked with nice towels and toiletries, planning meals I thought Isabella might enjoy. I'd even bought fresh flowers for their room and made sure the house was spotless. I'd been so excited to welcome them home, so ready to open my heart and my home to the family I'd been missing. I had no idea I was about to learn the hardest lesson of my life about the difference between being loved and being respected. The first sign of trouble came within hours of their arrival. Isabella walked through my front door like she was inspecting a hotel room she wasn't sure met her standards. Her eyes swept over the living room Alan and I had decorated with such care, taking in the family photos on the mantel, the comfortable furniture we'd saved up to buy piece by piece, the handmade quilts my mother had passed down to me. It's very homey, she said, and somehow managed to make the word sound like an insult. Harry was too busy hauling suitcases to notice the tone, but I caught it. Still, I pushed down the uncomfortable feeling and focused on being welcoming. After all, they'd just driven cross-country after Harry lost his job. They were probably tired and stressed. I made up your old room, I told Harry, leading them upstairs. I thought you might like having the space you grew up in. Actually, Mom, Harry said, pausing at the top of the stairs. Isabella and I were thinking we might use the master bedroom. It's bigger, and Isabella needs space for all her things. I stopped walking. The master bedroom. Alan's in my bedroom. The room where Alan had died in his sleep 3 years ago, where I still kept his cologne on the dresser and his reading glasses in the nightstand drawer. Aye, that's my room, I said quietly. Isabella stepped forward, her smile perfectly polite and completely cold. Oh, Betsy, I hope you don't mind. It's just that we have so much luggage, and I need proper space for my skincare routine and morning exercises. Harry mentioned the room has its own bathroom with double sinks. It would just make our stay so much easier. The way she said it, like it was already decided, like my comfort in my own home was a minor inconvenience to be worked around. Harry was looking at me with those pleading eyes he'd perfected as a child, the same look he'd used when he wanted to stay up past bedtime or have ice cream for dinner. Please, Mom, it would mean a lot to us, and you could take Harry's old room. It's still a nice size. I wanted to say no. Every fiber of my being wanted to explain that the master bedroom wasn't just about space or convenience, that it was the place where Alan and I had shared 35 years of marriage, where I still felt closest to his memory. But looking at my son's hopeful face, remembering how stressed he'd sounded about their financial situation, I found myself nodding. Of course, I heard myself say, whatever makes you comfortable. Isabella's smile became a fraction warmer. You're such a saint, Betsy. Harry told me how understanding you are. That was 3 months ago. 3 months of what was supposed to be a temporary arrangement while they got back on their feet. Within an hour of that first day, I was moving my clothes into Harry's childhood closet, packing away Alan's things into boxes I stored in the basement, watching Isabella rearrange my bedroom furniture to better accommodate her yoga mat and meditation corner. She'd brought what seemed like an entire department store worth of beauty products, supplements, and exercise equipment. I hope you don't mind, Isabella said, watching me carry out a box of Alan's old books. But I had to move some of your decorations. They didn't really fit with the feng shui of the space. The decorations she was referring to were our wedding photo and a small cross Alan had hung above our bed. Both were now sitting on the kitchen counter, displaced in my own home. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself they were going through a hard time. I told myself that good mothers make sacrifices for their children's happiness. But that first night, lying in Harry's twin bed surrounded by his old football trophies and high school posters, I stared at the ceiling and wondered what Alan would have said about this arrangement. The next few days established a pattern that should have alarmed me more than it did. Isabella had very specific requirements for how she liked things done. The coffee had to be made with filtered water and a precise coffee-to-water ratio. Breakfast needed to be ready by 8:30, but not before 8:15 because it might get cold. The towels had to be changed every other day and folded in a particular way. Isabella's used to a certain standard, Harry explained when I mentioned that maybe they could help with some of the household tasks. Her family always had help growing up. She doesn't really know how to do a lot of domestic stuff. Help. That's what he called it. Not servants, but help. As if the distinction made it better somehow. Meanwhile, Isabella spent her days doing online yoga classes, taking long baths with expensive oils that left rings around my tub, and having lengthy phone conversations with friends back in New York about how rustic and authentic her temporary living situation was. It's like stepping back in time. I heard her tell someone during one of these calls. Everything is so simple here. Betsy does all the cooking and cleaning herself. It's fascinating to see how people live when they don't have resources. Resources. Like Alan and I hadn't worked our whole lives to build something meaningful. Like the home we'd created with love and sacrifice was some kind of anthropological study in poverty. But it was Harry's behavior that hurt the most. My son, who I'd raised to be kind and respectful, who'd never asked me to wait on him hand and foot growing up, started treating me like I was invisible. When Isabella asked for fresh towels, Harry would relay the message to me instead of suggesting she get them herself. When Isabella complained that the water pressure in the shower wasn't strong enough, Harry asked if I could call a plumber instead of pointing out that the shower had been perfectly fine for the 30 years we'd lived in the house. She's just particular, he said when I gently suggested that maybe Isabella could adapt to our household routines instead of me constantly adapting to hers. You know how it is with some people. They have high standards. High standards. As if my standards were low because I didn't demand fresh flowers in every room and organic everything from the grocery store. The breaking point came about a month into their stay. I'd been planning a dinner for some church friends, something I'd been doing monthly for years. These were women who'd supported me through Alan's death, who'd helped me rebuild my life, who treated me with the love and respect of chosen family. Isabella had other plans. "Oh, Betsy," she said that morning over the breakfast I'd prepared for her. "I forgot to mention. I invited a few friends over tonight. They're driving down from the city to see how we're doing. Would it be possible for you to whip up something nice for dinner? Nothing too complicated, but they're used to a certain level of presentation." I stood at the stove, spatula in hand, trying to process what she'd just said. "Isabella, I already have people coming over tonight. My church friends. We've had this planned for weeks." Isabella's perfectly shaped eyebrows rose slightly. "Oh, well, I'm sure they'll understand if you need to reschedule. My friends are making such an effort to drive all this way." "They're making an effort too," I said, feeling heat rise in my cheeks. "These are important relationships to me." Isabella exchanged a look with Harry, one of those silent conversations that married couples have. Harry cleared his throat. "Mom, maybe Isabella's friends could join your dinner? Make it one big group." I could picture it immediately. My church friends, good women who worked hard and loved deeply, trying to make conversation with Isabella's New York socialite friends. The subtle condescension, the polite but obvious discomfort, the way my friends would feel judged and found wanting in their own company. "That wouldn't work," I said firmly. "Different groups, different conversations." Isabella's smile became razor thin. "I see. Well, Harry, perhaps we should just order pizza for my friends. I wouldn't want to impose on Betsy's social calendar." The way she said it made my monthly dinner with women who'd become family sound like a trivial inconvenience. But I held my ground, and that evening, my friends came over as planned. Isabella disappeared upstairs with Harry, claiming a headache, though I could hear them talking and laughing loudly enough that it was clearly meant to be heard. My friend Dorothy, who'd known me since before Harry was born, pulled me aside while we were cleaning up. "Honey," she said quietly, "is everything all right here? You seem tense." I wanted to tell her everything. About sleeping in Harry's childhood bedroom. About becoming an unpaid housekeeper in my own home. About the way Isabella looked at me like I was help rather than family. But admitting it out loud would mean admitting that my son, the boy I'd raised to be better than this, was allowing it to happen. "Just adjusting to having house guests," I said instead. "You know how it is." Dorothy didn't look convinced, but she didn't push. After everyone left, I found Isabella in the kitchen, examining the dishes I'd left soaking in the sink. "Your friends seem nice," she said in a tone that suggested they were anything but. Very down to earth. "They're good people," I said, starting to wash the glasses by hand. "I'm sure they are. It's just interesting, the different types of people Harry and I are used to socializing with now. You understand." I understood perfectly. I understood that in Isabella's world, my friends weren't sophisticated enough, educated enough, wealthy enough to matter. I understood that she saw me the same way. But the real betrayal came the next morning, when I overheard Isabella on the phone with someone, talking in the loud, careless way of people who assume they won't be heard. "Oh, it's exactly what you'd expect," she was saying. "Very lower middle class, very quaint. Betsy tries so hard, but you can tell she's never been exposed to anything refined. The dinner last night was painful. Her friends were sweet, but God, the conversations. One of them actually asked me if I'd ever shopped at Target." She laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Harry keeps saying it's temporary, but honestly, I don't know how much longer I can live like this. I mean, I'm grateful for the free room and board, but there are limits to what a person should have to endure. Free room and board. Like I was running a charity instead of welcoming family into my home. Like the meals I cooked and the house I cleaned and the comfort I provided were services she was entitled to rather than acts of love." I stood in the hallway frozen, listening to my daughter-in-law describe my life, my home, my friends as things to be endured. Things beneath her standards. Things she was suffering through until something better came along. That's when I realized that Isabella didn't see me as Harry's mother. She didn't see me as family. She saw me as the help. And worse, Harry was letting her. The conversation that changed everything happened on a Tuesday morning while I was making Isabella's special breakfast. She required steel-cut oats with organic blueberries, almond milk heated to exactly the right temperature, and a specific honey that cost more per jar than I usually spent on groceries in a week. Harry had left early for a job interview, one of many that had led nowhere in the past month. The job market was tougher than they'd expected, and I could see the stress wearing on him. His shoulders stayed tense, his smile looked forced, and he'd started snapping at me over little things he would have laughed off before. Isabella sat at my kitchen table, scrolling through her phone while I prepared her breakfast with the precision she demanded. She was having another one of her long conversations with someone from her old life, talking in that casual, loud way that suggested she'd forgotten I was in the room. "Honestly, Claire, I don't know how much longer I can keep this up," she was saying. "Living here is like being trapped in a time warp. Everything is so basic. The furniture looks like it came from a garage sale. There's no central air conditioning. And don't even get me started on the bathroom situation." I set her breakfast down in front of her, my hands steady despite the heat rising in my chest. The furniture she was insulting was furniture Alan and I had saved for months to buy. The bathroom she was complaining about was one Alan had renovated himself, learning plumbing and tile work on weekends, so we could have something beautiful without going into debt. "And Betsy," Isabella continued, not even acknowledging that I'd served her. "She means well, but she has no idea how to run a proper household. Everything is so improvised. Like, yesterday she served dinner on these mismatched plates like it was perfectly normal. The mismatched plates were a collection I'd built over 20 years of marriage, some from our wedding set, some from garage sales where Alan and I had hunted for treasures together, some gifts from friends who knew I loved beautiful tableware, even if I couldn't afford to buy it all at once. Each plate had a story, a memory attached to it. To Isabella, they were just evidence of my inadequacy. I keep trying to give her gentle suggestions about how to improve things, but she's so set in her ways. It's like she's never been around people who understand quality. Quality. I'd been providing her with 3 meals a day made from scratch, keeping the house spotless, doing her laundry, and making sure she had everything she needed. But because I didn't do it with the professional polish of paid staff, it wasn't quality. The worst part is that Harry doesn't see it. He thinks this is normal because he grew up here. He doesn't understand that we're basically living like college students crashing at someone's parents' house. That comment hit harder than the rest. Harry's childhood, the home Alan and I had worked so hard to create for him, reduced to a college crash pad. The love we'd poured into raising him dismissed as inexperience with normal living. Isabella laughed at something her friend said, then continued. I know. But what choice do we have right now? Free room and board is free room and board. Once Harry gets a decent job, we can get our own place, and I can have a proper home again. Until then, I guess I'll just have to manage. Manage. Like living in my home was a hardship she was bravely enduring. At least Betsy is manageable. She doesn't really push back on anything. She seems to understand her place in all this. My place. In my own home, I apparently had a place, and it wasn't as the head of the household or even as an equal family member. It was as someone who understood where she belonged in Isabella's hierarchy. That's when the door opened and Harry came back, earlier than expected. Isabella quickly ended her phone call, switching to the warm, loving voice she used when he was around. Darling, how did the interview go? Harry's face told the story before his words did. Another rejection. Another door closed. Another step further away from the independence that would free them from having to live with his mother. They went with someone with more experience, he said, slumping into a chair. I'm starting to think we should expand our search. Maybe look at opportunities in other cities. Isabella's face lit up. Oh, that's a wonderful idea. We could look at Boston, or maybe even go back to New York. Daddy might have some connections he could reach out to. That would require money for deposits, moving expenses, Harry said. Money we don't have right now. That's when Isabella looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Calculating. Appraising. Like she was sizing up an asset she'd just realized she could use. Betsy, she said, her voice suddenly sweet as honey. Harry and I were wondering if we could talk to you about something important. I dried my hands on the dish towel, every instinct telling me to be wary. Of course. Well, we've been thinking about our situation, and we realized how generous you've been, letting us stay here, taking care of everything. We don't want to take advantage of your kindness. The words sounded right, but something in her tone made them feel wrong. We've been talking about ways we could contribute more while we're here, Harry added, and I felt a small relief. Maybe they'd finally realized how much I'd been doing. Maybe they wanted to help with cooking or cleaning or expenses. The thing is, Isabella continued, We're both focused on job searching and networking right now. It's really a full-time job, and we need to be available for interviews and calls at any time. We can't really take on household responsibilities that might interfere with our career focus. I nodded slowly, not sure where this was going. But we realized there might be another way we could contribute, Isabella said. You have this lovely home, and you're so good at taking care of people. We were thinking, what if we made this arrangement more official? Official how? I asked. Harry leaned forward, his eyes bright with an enthusiasm that made my stomach clench. Mom, what if you turned this into a bed and breakfast? You're already an amazing cook. You know how to make people comfortable. Isabella has experience with hospitality from her family's connections. We could help you set it up as a real business. Isabella nodded eagerly. It would be perfect. You could finally monetize all these skills you have. And Harry and I could stay here as your business partners, helping you manage everything. We'd handle the marketing, the guest relations, all the sophisticated aspects that require certain backgrounds. The sophisticated aspects. The parts that required breeding and education and connections I apparently didn't have. I don't understand, I said. Are you talking about strangers staying in our home? Well, yes, Isabella said. But think about the income potential. And we'd be here to make sure everything runs smoothly. You could focus on what you do best, the cooking and cleaning, while we handle the guest experience and business development. Cooking and cleaning. My role in this business partnership they were proposing was to be the cook and the maid. In my own home. We've already been talking about how to optimize the space, Harry added. The master bedroom could be the premium suite. My old room could be a standard guest room. You could move into the basement. We could fix it up really nice, give you privacy while keeping you close enough to handle any issues that come up during the night. The basement. They wanted me to move into the basement of the house Alan and I had bought, while they turned our bedroom into a hotel suite for paying customers. Think about it, Mom, Harry continued, his voice taking on the persuasive tone he'd perfected in his marketing career. You're always talking about wanting to expand your catering business. This could be the perfect opportunity. Isabella knows people in hospitality. She could bring in high-end clientele who would pay premium rates. And you'd be doing what you love, Isabella added, taking care of people, making them feel at home. It's really a perfect fit for your skill set. My skill set, taking care of people, making them feel at home, while they profited from my labor and lived in my house as my business partners rather than my guests. I need to think about this, I said quietly. Isabella's smile faltered just slightly. Of course, it's a big decision, but don't think too long. Opportunities like this don't wait forever. Harry and I are excited to get started on building something together. Building something together. The three of us. Except in their vision, I was the employee and they were the management. After they left for another networking lunch, I sat in my kitchen, looking around at the home Alan and I had built with our own hands and hearts. Every corner held memories. Every room had been painted and decorated and filled with love over decades of marriage. And now my son and his wife wanted to turn it into a business where I would work as their domestic help while they lived as the proprietors. That's when I realized the truth I'd been avoiding for weeks. This wasn't temporary. They had no intention of leaving. They had no intention of treating me as family. They saw me as a resource to be managed, a convenience to be optimized, a service to be utilized. They wanted me to give them my home, my labor, and my dignity, all while being grateful for the opportunity to serve them. But what they didn't know was that Alan had been right to worry about situations exactly like this one. What they didn't know was that the house they were planning to turn into their business wasn't actually mine to give away. What they didn't know was that Alan's careful planning was about to become their undoing. The pressure started building the very next day. Isabella had apparently taken my need to think about it as a negotiation tactic rather than genuine hesitation about their bed and breakfast scheme. She came downstairs that morning with a tablet full of research, spreadsheets, and what looked like a complete business plan. Betsy, I couldn't sleep last night because I was so excited about our project, she said, settling at the kitchen table with the confidence of someone who'd already made all the important decisions. I've been looking at comparable bed and breakfasts in the area, and the income potential is incredible. She turned the tablet toward me, showing screenshots of elegant inns with professional photography and premium pricing. Look at this place just 20 minutes from here. They're charging $300 a night for rooms that honestly aren't nearly as charming as what we could create. $300 a night. I tried to imagine strangers paying that much to sleep in Harry's childhood bedroom while I served them breakfast in my kitchen. And the reviews all mention the same things, Isabella continued, her voice building with enthusiasm. Personal touches, home-cooked meals, feeling like part of the family. Betsy, this is exactly what you do naturally. We just need to package it properly and market it to the right clientele. Harry appeared in the doorway, already dressed for another day of job hunting that had stretched into its third month since they'd moved in with me. His attention was completely focused on Isabella's presentation. Show her the revenue projections, he said, sitting down beside his wife. Isabella flipped to another screen, covered in numbers that made my head spin. If we book just 15 nights a month at an average rate of $250 per night, that's $45,000 in annual revenue. Even accounting for expenses and improvements, you'd be making more than your catering business brings in. The numbers sounded impressive, but something about the way she presented them felt wrong. Like she was selling me something I hadn't asked to buy. Of course, there would be startup costs, Isabella continued smoothly. Professional linens, updated decor, marketing materials, maybe some light renovations to really make the space shine. Harry and I have been discussing how we could help with that. Help how? I asked. Harry leaned forward eagerly. We could invest our savings into the renovations. Make it a real partnership. Isabella has an eye for design, and I have marketing experience. We could create something really special together. Their savings. The money they'd been burning through for 3 months while living in my house rent-free, eating my food, using my utilities. The money they claimed to need for deposits and moving expenses if they found jobs in other cities. But that would mean you'd be staying here permanently, I said. Isabella and Harry exchanged another one of those loaded looks. Well, not permanently, Isabella said carefully. But for the foreseeable future, yes. It would take time to build the business, establish a reputation, create the systems we'd need to implement. Create the systems. In my own home, they wanted to create systems for a business using my house and my labor. Think about it, Mom, Harry said. You've been talking for years about wanting to do more with your catering. This could be your chance to really build something significant. But as the days passed, I began to realize their vision of building something together involved me doing all the work while they managed the profits and made the decisions. Isabella started treating the bed and breakfast plan like it was already approved. She walked through the house with a critical eye, pointing out everything that would need to change. This wallpaper in the dining room is too busy, she announced during one of these inspections. Guests expect a more sophisticated, neutral palette. And these family photos everywhere. They make the space feel too personal. We'd need to replace them with generic art that creates ambience without overwhelming the decor. Family photos. Pictures of Harry growing up, of Alan and me at various anniversaries, of holidays and celebrations and moments that marked the decades we'd spent building a life in this house. Too personal for the business she was planning to run from my home. And this kitchen, Isabella continued, running her fingers along the countertops Alan had installed himself. It's functional, but guests expect a certain level of finish. We'd probably want to update the cabinets, maybe add granite counters, definitely get new appliances. The refrigerator is ancient. The refrigerator that had served my family perfectly well for 15 years was suddenly ancient. The cabinets that Alan had built with his own hands were suddenly substandard. Everything that made this house our home was suddenly an obstacle to Isabella's vision of profitable hospitality. Meanwhile, their behavior toward me was becoming more demanding, not less. Isabella had started leaving lists of tasks for me each morning, written in her neat handwriting and left prominently on the kitchen counter. Betsy, please remember to use the good towels for our guest bathroom. Pick up dry cleaning by 3 p.m. Dinner tonight should be something light, maybe that salmon dish you made last week, but with the sauce on the side. Guest bathroom. She was talking about Alan's and my master bathroom, the one they'd taken over on their first day here. Harry had started acting like my compliance with Isabella's requests was a given. When I mentioned that I had a catering job scheduled for the weekend, he frowned. Mom, maybe you should start thinking about scaling back on outside commitments. Once we get the bed and breakfast running, you'll need to be available here full-time. Available here full-time. To serve the guests who would be paying Isabella and Harry to stay in my house. What about my existing clients? I asked. I've been building these relationships for years. Well, you can't serve two masters, Isabella said with a laugh that didn't reach her eyes. If you want this new venture to succeed, you'll need to prioritize it. Besides, catering is so unpredictable. This would give you steady, reliable income. Steady, reliable income from working as a live-in innkeeper in my own home while they collected the profits. But the most disturbing change was in how they talked about the house itself. Gradually, their language shifted from your house to our house to the property. We've been thinking about the property's potential, Isabella said during one of their planning sessions that I wasn't invited to participate in, but was expected to overhear. The backyard could easily accommodate a small event space. Wedding receptions, corporate retreats. The revenue opportunities are endless. And the location is perfect, Harry added. Close enough to the city for weekend getaways, but far enough out to feel like an escape. They were talking about my home like it was a development opportunity. Like the yard where Alan and I had hosted countless barbecues, and where Harry had learned to ride his bike was just square footage waiting to be monetized. The breaking point came when I found Isabella on the phone with what sounded like a contractor, discussing renovation timelines and cost estimates. Yes, we're looking at a complete refresh, she was saying. New flooring throughout, updated fixtures, maybe opening up some of the walls to create better flow. The current layout is very dated. Dated. Our home, the place Alan and I had poured our hearts into creating, was dated. Oh, and we'll need estimates for converting the basement into a proper apartment. Nothing fancy, just a bedroom, small kitchenette, and bathroom. It's for the live-in manager, so comfort is more important than luxury. The live-in manager. She was talking about me like I was the hired help who would be living in the basement, while she and Harry ran the business from the main floors of my house. When I confronted her about the call, Isabella didn't even have the grace to look embarrassed. Oh, that was just preliminary research, she said airily. I wanted to get a sense of what improvements would cost, so we can budget properly. You don't mind, do you? The casual way she asked, like getting renovation estimates for my house without my permission, was a minor courtesy. She was extending rather than a massive overreach. Isabella, I haven't agreed to any of this. Her smile became sharper. Oh, I know that. But Harry and I are just trying to be proactive. We want to be ready to move forward as soon as you're ready to commit. Commit. Like I was the one holding up their generous offer to take over my house and my life. And who exactly would be paying for these renovations? I asked pointedly. Isabella's smile flickered for just a moment. Well, we'd all contribute what we can. Harry and I have some savings left, and you have your catering income. We'd figure out a fair way to split the investment based on everyone's ability to contribute. What she wasn't saying, but what I was beginning to understand, was that their savings were nearly gone after 3 months of unemployment. They were expecting me to fund the renovations to my own house, so they could turn it into their business. That night, I lay in Harry's childhood bed, staring at his old posters and trophies, and tried to figure out how everything had gone so wrong so quickly. 3 months ago, I'd been living peacefully in my own home, running my catering business, building relationships with people who treated me with respect and affection. Now I was being pressured to transform my home into a business where I would work as an employee while my son and his wife lived as my bosses, using my money to fund their dreams. But what scared me most wasn't their plan for the house. What scared me was how completely Harry had been swept up in Isabella's vision. The son I'd raised to be kind and respectful had become someone who looked at his mother's home as a business opportunity and his mother's labor as a resource to be managed. He'd stopped seeing me as his mother. He'd started seeing me as Isabella saw me, as help. And I was beginning to realize that unless I did something dramatic to change the situation, this wasn't going to end with them finding jobs and moving out. This was going to end with them taking over my life completely, while convincing themselves and everyone else that they were doing me a favor. The question was what I could do about it. The house was mine, but they were family. My catering business was mine, but they were talking about it like it was a stepping stone to something bigger that they would control. I felt trapped in my own life, and I couldn't see a way out that wouldn't destroy my relationship with Harry forever. What I didn't realize was that Alan had seen this possibility coming years ago, and he'd built me an escape route I didn't even know existed. ACT 5. The midpoint devastation, trust fund access issue fixed. The ultimatum came on a Thursday morning, while I was making Isabella's breakfast. Again, the routine had become so automatic that I could prepare her steel-cut oats and arrange her supplements without even thinking about it. Like muscle memory, but for servitude. Isabella was on another phone call, this time with someone she called the contractor from yesterday. She wasn't even pretending to hide these conversations anymore. "Yes, I think we're ready to move forward with the estimates," she was saying. "The basement conversion is definitely happening, and we'll probably want to start with the kitchen renovation, since that's the centerpiece of the guest experience." My kitchen. She was planning to renovate my kitchen to better serve the guests who would be paying her to stay in my house. Harry came downstairs, looking defeated in a way that had become his default expression. Another rejection email, probably, or another job that had seemed promising until they told him they'd gone with someone else. 3 months of searching had yielded nothing but disappointment and mounting desperation. "Any luck with the Johnson opportunity?" Isabella asked, temporarily pausing her renovation planning. "They're not moving forward with the position," Harry said, slumping into his chair. "Budget cuts." Isabella's face fell, but not with sympathy, with calculation. I could see her running numbers in her head, recalculating timelines, adjusting expectations. "Well," she said after a moment, "maybe this is the universe telling us we should focus on what's right in front of us. Harry, we can't keep putting our lives on hold waiting for the perfect job to appear." She turned to me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Betsy, Harry and I need to talk to you about something important." The words sent ice through my veins. Nothing good ever started with that phrase. "We've been incredibly grateful for your hospitality," Isabella continued, "but we need to make some decisions about our future. Harry's job search isn't going as quickly as we'd hoped, and we can't keep living in limbo indefinitely." "Of course," I said carefully. "I understand if you need to look at other options." Isabella's laugh was sharp. "Oh, we are looking at other options. That's exactly what we need to discuss." Harry cleared his throat. "Mom, Isabella and I have been talking, and we think it's time to make the bed and breakfast idea official. We're ready to commit to making this our full-time focus." "But I haven't agreed to that," I said. "We know," Isabella said, her voice taking on a tone I'd never heard before. Patient but firm, like she was explaining something simple to someone who wasn't quite bright enough to understand. "But the reality is, we need to move forward with our lives. We can't keep floating in this temporary situation indefinitely. I thought you were looking for jobs. I thought this living situation was temporary until you got back on your feet." Isabella set down her coffee cup with a deliberate clink. "Betsy, we need to be realistic about what's happening here. Harry's been looking for 3 months without success. We've burned through most of our savings. We need a sustainable plan. A sustainable plan that doesn't involve taking over my house," I said. "Taking over?" Isabella's eyebrows rose in what looked like genuine surprise. "Betsy, we're talking about creating a partnership, a business opportunity that would benefit all of us. You're talking about turning my home into a hotel where I work as your employee." Harry leaned forward, his voice taking on that persuasive marketing tone that set my teeth on edge. "Mom, you're looking at this wrong. This would be your business. We'd just be helping you run it professionally. My business where you live in the master bedroom, make all the decisions, and I live in the basement." Isabella's mask of patience was starting to slip. "The basement apartment would be lovely. Private, comfortable. You'd have your own space while still being available for guest needs. Available for guest needs. Like a live-in housekeeper. And what if I say no?" I asked. The silence that followed was the loudest sound I'd ever heard. Isabella and Harry exchanged another one of those looks, the kind that said they'd already discussed this possibility and decided how to handle it. "Well," Isabella said finally, "that would be unfortunate." "Unfortunate how?" Harry shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Mom, the thing is, we really can't afford to start over somewhere else right now. Moving costs, deposits, first month's rent. We just don't have that kind of money. So you'd need to stay here indefinitely," I said. "For a while longer, yes," Isabella said. "But Betsy, you have to understand, that creates problems for everyone. If we're going to be here long-term anyway, we need to make the living situation work for all of us. It's been working fine." Isabella's laugh was bitter. "Has it though? Betsy, I don't think you realize how much stress this arrangement is putting on our marriage. Harry and I are newlyweds trying to build a life together, and we're stuck living like teenagers in his childhood bedroom. Stuck. like living in my house was a prison sentence they were enduring. We need our own space, Isabella continued. We need to feel like adults, like partners in our own lives. And frankly, we need some boundaries around household management. Boundaries? Isabella took a deep breath, like she was preparing to say something difficult. Betsy, you're a wonderful person, but you have a very specific way of doing things. The way you run this house, the standards you maintain, they're just not what Harry and I are used to. Standards. The way I ran the house where I'd lived for 30 years, raised a child, and built a marriage was suddenly substandard. What exactly are you saying? I'm saying that if we're going to continue living here, we need to establish some clearer roles, Isabella said. Harry and I need to be able to manage our own space, make our own decisions about how we want to live. In my house. In our shared living space, Isabella corrected. Betsy, I think you're having trouble adjusting to the reality that Harry is a married man now. He has a wife, and his primary loyalty is to our marriage, not to old family dynamics. Old family dynamics. Like a mother's relationship with her son was an outdated tradition that needed to be updated for modern times. Harry finally spoke, and his words hit me like a physical blow. Mom, Isabella's right. We can't keep living like guests in your house. If we're going to be here, we need to be here as equals. Equals. In the house Alan and I had bought and paid for, where I'd raised Harry from a baby to a man, where every room held memories of the life I'd built with my own hands and heart. What does that mean exactly? I asked. Isabella leaned forward, her voice becoming businesslike. It means we need to formalize our living arrangement. Establish clear responsibilities and expectations. Harry and I would take over the master bedroom permanently, along with managing the main living areas. You'd be responsible for cooking and household maintenance, but we'd handle all the major decisions about the property. Property. Not my home. Property. And in exchange? I asked. In exchange, you get to continue living here, Isabella said, like she was offering me a generous gift. Plus, we'd cover utilities and groceries going forward. Think of it as our contribution to the household. Cover utilities and groceries. In the house I owned, with the money they didn't have because they couldn't find jobs. What if I don't agree to these terms? I asked. Isabella's smile became arctic. Well, then we'd have to reconsider whether this living arrangement is working for anyone. Harry and I would need to make some hard decisions about our future. The threat was clear even though she'd wrapped it in polite language. Agree to become the housekeeper in my own home, or lose my son forever. Harry wouldn't meet my eyes. My son, the boy I'd sacrificed everything for, couldn't even look at me while his wife threatened to take him away unless I submitted to their demands. I need time to think about this, I said. Of course, Isabella said graciously. But don't take too long. Harry and I can't keep living in limbo indefinitely. After they left for another networking lunch that would probably last all day, I sat in my kitchen trying to process what had just happened. My son and his wife had just given me an ultimatum. Accept being treated like hired help in my own home, or watch them disappear from my life. But as I sat there, something Alan used to say kept echoing in my mind. Betsy, always remember that when someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. Isabella had just shown me exactly who she was. Someone who would manipulate and threaten to get what she wanted. Someone who saw me as an obstacle to be managed rather than a person to be respected. And Harry had shown me who he'd become under her influence. Someone who would choose comfort over character. Someone who would let his wife threaten his mother rather than stand up for what was right. The question was what I was going to do about it. That's when I remembered Alan's papers, the ones he'd spent so many evenings working on at this same kitchen table. The trust documents I'd never fully understood. The legal protections he'd insisted on setting up even though I'd told him they were unnecessary. Maybe it was time to understand exactly what Alan had been so worried about. Maybe it was time to see what options he'd built into those documents I'd signed without really reading. Maybe it was time to find out what happened when people who thought they held all the cards discovered they'd been playing the wrong game entirely. The next few weeks were the darkest period of my life since Alan's death. Isabella and Harry had taken my silence as acceptance of their ultimatum, and they began acting like the new arrangement was already in place. What had started 3 months ago as a temporary stay while Harry looked for work had transformed into something unrecognizable. The loving son who'd called me every week for 2 years after his father's death. who'd flown home immediately when I'd been hospitalized with pneumonia the previous winter, had become a stranger who treated me like household staff. Isabella started each day by leaving detailed instructions for me on the kitchen counter, written in her precise handwriting like a boss leaving tasks for an employee. Betsy, please have lunch ready by 12:30. We have potential investors coming by to look at the property. Make sure the house is spotless and try to stay out of sight during their visit. The guest bathroom needs fresh towels and flowers. Thank you, potential investors. They were showing my house to strangers, discussing business plans I wasn't part of, making decisions about my future without including me in the conversations. The visitors were a parade of real estate developers, hospitality consultants, and what Isabella called angel investors. They walked through my home like they were appraising livestock, pointing at walls that needed to come down, rooms that needed updating, spaces that could be optimized for revenue generation. I watched from the kitchen window as Isabella gave them tours of the backyard, gesturing excitedly as she described her vision for outdoor event spaces and expanded parking. She moved through my garden like she owned it, trampling the flower beds Alan and I had planted together, pulling up stakes that marked where I'd planned to expand my herb garden this spring. The current landscaping is very amateur, I heard her tell one consultant. We'd want to bring in professionals to create something that photographs well for marketing materials. Amateur. The garden Alan and I had tended for 20 years, where we'd grown vegetables for our table and flowers for our anniversary dinners, was amateur work that needed professional correction. But the worst part wasn't what Isabella was doing to my house. It was what she was doing to my relationship with Harry. My son had become a stranger. The boy who used to call me every Sunday just to chat, who never forgot my birthday or Mother's Day, who used to ask my opinion about everything from job decisions to what tie to wear to important meetings, now barely spoke to me except to relay Isabella's instructions. Mom, Isabella asked if you could make sure dinner is ready by 6 tonight, he'd say, not looking at me directly. She's trying to keep us on a schedule. A schedule. In my own home, I was being put on a schedule by my son's wife. When I tried to talk to him alone, to ask him how he felt about what was happening, Harry became defensive and distant. Mom, I know this is an adjustment for you, but Isabella and I are trying to build something here. We're trying to create a future together. What about my future? I asked. What about what I want? Harry's jaw tightened. You're being selfish. Isabella has given up everything to try to make this work. She could have stayed in New York with her family, lived comfortably while I figured things out. Instead, she's here trying to build something that could benefit all of us. Selfish. Wanting to maintain some dignity and autonomy in my own home was selfish. Harry, she's planning to turn our house into a business where I work as the help while you two collect the profits. That's not how Isabella sees it, Harry said. She sees it as giving you an opportunity to use your skills in a more professional setting. Professional setting. Like my home wasn't professional enough, my cooking wasn't sophisticated enough, my life wasn't valuable enough as it was. The breaking point came when I realized they were actively sabotaging my catering business. I'd been scheduled to cater a golden anniversary party for the Hendersons, a sweet couple from church who'd become like family to me over the years. It was a big job, 50 people, and I'd been planning the menu for weeks. The morning of the event, I went to the refrigerator to start my prep work and found that half my ingredients were missing. The prime rib I'd special ordered, the imported cheese I'd bought for the appetizer plates, the fresh flowers I'd planned to use for garnishes. Isabella, I called, my voice tight with panic. Have you seen the food I had stored for today's catering job? Isabella appeared in the doorway, looking genuinely confused. Oh, was that for a catering job? I thought it was just groceries. Harry and I used some of it for dinner last night when we had those investors over. I hope that's okay. Okay. She'd used my client's expensive ingredients to cook dinner for strangers who were planning to take over my house, and she hoped that was okay. Isabella, that food cost over $200. I have 50 people expecting dinner tonight. Oh no. Isabella's hand flew to her mouth in what looked like genuine dismay. I had no idea. Betsy, I'm so sorry. Can't you just pick up replacements? Not the prime rib. Not the specialty cheese. Not with 4 hours' notice. Isabella bit her lip, looking distressed. This is terrible. What are you going to do? What was I going to do? Not what were we going to do, or how could she help fix the problem she'd created? What was I going to do to solve this crisis by myself? I spent the day frantically calling suppliers, driving to 3 different grocery stores, completely redesigning the menu around what I could find on short notice. The event went off successfully, but barely, and I could see the disappointment in Mrs. Henderson's face when I had to explain why the menu had changed at the last minute. "Oh, Betsy," she said sadly, "this isn't like you. You're usually so prepared, so professional." Professional. There was that word again. My reputation for reliability and professionalism, built over years of careful work, was crumbling because Isabella had sabotaged my supplies and claimed it was an innocent mistake. But the real devastation came later that week, when I found out it hadn't been a mistake at all. I was putting away laundry when I heard Isabella on one of her phone calls, talking to someone about managing the transition. "The catering thing is becoming a problem," Isabella was saying. "She's still treating it like a real business instead of understanding that it needs to be scaled back. Last week she got all dramatic because I used some groceries for an important dinner. Like, hello, priorities." She laughed, and the sound made my blood run cold. I know, right? Harry thinks I should be more direct with her, but I think this approach is working. Create some natural consequences. Let her see that trying to maintain all these outside commitments while we're building something bigger just isn't practical. Natural consequences. Isabella had deliberately sabotaged my catering job to teach me a lesson about priorities. The goal is to get her to see that the bed and breakfast should be her full focus. Once she lets go of all these little side hustles, she'll be able to put her energy where it belongs. Side hustles. My catering business, the work I'd built with my own hands, the relationships I'd cultivated over years, were side hustles that needed to be eliminated so I could focus on serving guests in what used to be my home. "She'll come around," Isabella continued. "She doesn't really have any other options." Options. Isabella believed I didn't have any options except to submit to her plan for my life. That night, I sat in Harry's childhood bedroom, surrounded by his old trophies and posters, and faced the truth I'd been avoiding. This wasn't about temporary housing or financial difficulties, or even about turning my house into a business. This was about control. Isabella wanted to control my home, my work, my daily life, and my relationship with my son. And she was willing to sabotage my livelihood and manipulate my son to get what she wanted. Harry was letting it happen because it was easier than standing up to his wife. Because confronting Isabella's behavior would mean admitting he'd married someone capable of cruelty. Because maintaining his marriage was more important to him than protecting his mother. In the space of 3 months, I was losing everything. My home was being taken over, my business was being destroyed, my son was being turned against me, and my future was being decided by people who saw me as an obstacle to their plans rather than a person deserving of respect. But as I sat there in the darkness, Alan's voice echoed in my memory. "Betsy, I want to make sure you always have choices." Maybe it was time to find out what choices Alan had actually given me. Maybe it was time to stop being a victim of other people's plans and start making some plans of my own. Maybe it was time to show Isabella and Harry what happened when they pushed someone who had more options than they realized. The trust documents Alan had left were in our bedroom closet, in the metal file box he'd labeled important papers. I'd moved it to the basement storage room when Isabella and Harry took over the master bedroom. I'd never looked at them closely, trusting Alan to handle the legal details while I focused on day-to-day life. But I wasn't living day-to-day anymore. I was fighting for my survival. And tomorrow, I was going to find out exactly what weapons Alan had given me for this battle. The next morning, I waited until Isabella and Harry left for another networking breakfast before I retrieved Alan's file box from the basement where I'd stored it after they took over our bedroom. My hands trembled as I opened it, not from fear, but from something else. Hope, maybe. Or desperation. Alan had been meticulous about organization. Every document was labeled, dated, and filed in chronological order. Insurance policies, the house deed, investment statements, and there, in a thick manila folder marked trust documents, read carefully, was everything Alan had tried to explain to me years ago. The legal language was dense, full of terms I didn't understand. But as I read through the pages, certain phrases started jumping out at me. Respect and dignity clause. Successor trustee authority. Breach of trust conditions. Property transfer provisions. I read the same paragraphs over and over, trying to understand what Alan had actually set up. The house wasn't just mine. It was held in a living trust with very specific conditions about how it could be used and who could live there. But the more I read, the more confused I became. The legal terminology might as well have been written in a foreign language. I needed help understanding what these documents actually meant, what rights they gave me, what protections Alan had built in. That's when I remembered Robert Morrison, the lawyer who'd helped Alan set up the trust. Alan had insisted I meet him, had made me sit through that long appointment where Robert had explained everything in detail. I'd nodded and smiled and signed where Alan pointed, but I hadn't really listened. I'd trusted Alan to handle the complicated parts. Now I needed to understand those complicated parts for myself. Robert's office was in a small building downtown, nothing fancy but professional and welcoming. When I called to make an appointment, his secretary had remembered my name immediately. "Mrs. Coleman, how lovely to hear from you. Mr. Morrison always asks about you when we're updating files. He said to tell you that if you ever needed anything related to the trust Alan set up, you should call right away." The appointment was for that same afternoon. I spent the morning in a state of nervous energy, cleaning the house with an intensity that had nothing to do with Isabella's standards and everything to do with needing to move, to do something, to burn off the anxiety that was building in my chest. When Isabella and Harry returned from their breakfast, they found me scrubbing the kitchen counters for the third time. "Betsy, you seem stressed," Isabella observed. "Is everything all right?" "Fine," I said, not trusting myself to say more. "We have exciting news," Harry said, his voice carrying an enthusiasm that made my stomach clench. "Isabella met with a hospitality consultant this morning who thinks our concept is brilliant. She wants to feature us in an article about innovative bed and breakfast models." "Feature us," I repeated. "Well, feature the business," Isabella clarified. "She's particularly interested in our approach to combining family tradition with modern hospitality standards." Family tradition. They were going to use my family's story, Alan's and my history in this house, as marketing material for their business venture. "When is this article coming out?" I asked. "She wants to do the interview next week," Isabella said. "We'll need to make sure the house is camera ready. Maybe we should accelerate some of those renovation plans we've been discussing." Renovation plans I'd never agreed to, for a business I'd never approved, featuring a family story that belonged to me. "I have an appointment this afternoon," I said. "I'll be back later." Isabella's eyebrows rose slightly. "An appointment? Should I ask what for?" "Personal business," I said, hanging up my cleaning cloth. "Well, don't be gone too long," Isabella said with that smile that never reached her eyes. "We're having dinner with the photography team tonight, so they can scout locations for the article shoot." Photography team. They were bringing photographers into my house to take pictures for a magazine article about a business that didn't exist, using my home and my story without my permission. That decided it. Whatever Alan's trust documents said, whatever options they gave me, I was going to use them. Robert Morrison's office felt like a sanctuary. He was exactly as I remembered him, a kind man in his 60s with patient eyes and a gentle manner that made it easy to ask questions without feeling stupid. "Betsy," he said warmly, gesturing to the chair across from his desk, "I'm so glad you called. Alan made me promise to be available whenever you needed help understanding the provisions he set up." "I'm afraid I need a lot of help," I admitted. I never really understood what Alan was doing with all those legal documents. Robert smiled. Alan anticipated that. He was very specific about wanting protections in place that you might not need for years, if ever. But he wanted to make sure they were there just in case. He pulled out a thick file with my name on it. "Let me explain what Alan created for you. It's actually quite innovative." For the next hour, Robert walked me through every detail of Alan's plan. The house was held in a living trust, with me as the primary beneficiary and trustee. But Alan had included what he called a respect and dignity clause that protected me from being mistreated or taken advantage of by family members. Alan was very concerned about situations where adult children might pressure elderly parents into signing over property or accepting living arrangements that weren't in their best interests, Robert explained. He'd seen it happen to friends, and he wanted to make sure you always had protection and choices. The trust included specific language about emotional abuse, manipulation, or coercion by beneficiaries or their spouses. If those conditions were met, I had the right to invoke the respect clause, which would immediately transfer control of the property to a successor trustee, and begin the process of implementing Alan's alternative distribution plan. Alternative distribution plan? I asked. Robert's eyes lit up. This was Alan's favorite part. He knew how much you both cared about community service, especially supporting women who were going through difficult transitions. If the respect clause was ever invoked, the house would be transferred to a nonprofit that supports women starting over after divorce, death of a spouse, or other major life changes. I stared at him. Alan wanted to give our house to charity. Only if you were being mistreated by family members, Robert said gently. Alan figured that if his son or daughter-in-law were treating you badly enough to trigger the respect clause, they didn't deserve to inherit what he'd worked so hard to build. My heart was racing. What would happen to me? You'd receive a cash settlement from the trust that would allow you to start fresh wherever you wanted to live. Alan calculated it to be enough for a comfortable apartment and living expenses for several years. Plus, he set aside additional funds for you to expand your catering business if you wanted to. Alan had planned for this exact situation. He'd seen the possibility that Harry might prioritize a spouse over his mother, that someone might try to manipulate me into giving up my home and my independence. How would this work? I asked. Hypothetically. Robert opened another folder. You'd need to document the mistreatment. Alan was very specific about that. He didn't want the clause to be invoked frivolously. You'd need evidence of emotional abuse, manipulation, or coercion. Recorded conversations, written demands, witness statements, anything that showed a pattern of disrespectful treatment. Evidence. I thought about Isabella's phone calls, her written lists of demands, the way she'd sabotaged my catering job. I thought about the potential investors she'd brought through my house, the renovation plans she'd made without my consent, the ultimatum she'd given me about accepting a servant's role in my own home. The successor trustee would review the evidence and make a determination, Robert continued. If they agreed that the respect clause had been violated, the alternative distribution would proceed immediately. No court involvement, no lengthy legal battles. Alan wanted to make sure you could get out of a bad situation quickly and cleanly. Who's the successor trustee? I asked. Robert smiled. Judge Patricia Williams. She's retired now, but she was Alan's choice because of her experience with elder abuse cases and her reputation for fairness. Alan trusted her completely. Patricia Williams. I knew that name. She'd been featured in the local paper several times for her work with domestic violence cases and advocacy for senior citizens' rights. She's still available to serve? I asked. Oh yes. Alan updated the trustee designation just 2 years before he died. Judge Williams agreed to serve for as long as you might need her. 2 years before he died. Alan had been updating these protections recently, making sure they were current and enforceable. Robert, I said slowly, I think I might need to invoke this clause. His expression became serious. Tell me what's happening, Betsy. I told him everything. Isabella's demands, Harry's transformation, the ultimatum about becoming a servant in my own home, the sabotage of my business, the plans to turn my house into their hotel. Robert took notes, asked clarifying questions, and when I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Betsy, he said finally, this is exactly the kind of situation Alan was worried about. You have clear grounds to invoke the respect clause. What happens next? You start documenting everything. I'll give you some guidelines about what kind of evidence Judge Williams will need to see. And then, when you're ready, we contact her and begin the process. How long does it take? Once Judge Williams reviews the evidence and determines there's been a breach, the transfer happens within 30 days. Alan wanted to make sure that if you needed to get out of a bad situation, you could do it quickly. 30 days. In 30 days, I could be free of Isabella's demands and Harry's betrayal. I could start over with enough money to live comfortably and build my catering business into something truly my own. But it would also mean losing the house Alan and I had built together. It would mean Harry would inherit nothing from his father. It would mean potentially destroying my relationship with my son forever. This is a big decision, Robert said gently. Alan never wanted you to feel pressured to use these provisions. He just wanted you to know they were there if you needed them. I understand, I said. Can I have some time to think about it? Of course. But Betsy, don't wait too long if the situation is getting worse. Alan built these protections so you wouldn't have to suffer in silence. I drove home with Robert's documentation guidelines and a recording device he'd given me. Just in case you need to capture any conversations, he'd said. As I pulled into my driveway, I saw Isabella in the front yard with a photographer, posing against the garden Alan and I had planted. She was laughing, gesturing at the house like she was showing off her own property. This was my choice: submit to their plan and become a servant in my own home, or invoke Alan's protections and start over with nothing but my dignity and a chance to build something new. The woman who'd walked into Robert's office might have chosen submission, chosen to keep the peace, chosen to sacrifice her own well-being for the sake of family harmony. But the woman walking back into that house had remembered something Alan used to say. Betsy, never let anyone convince you that you deserve less than respect. The moment you accept being treated badly is the moment you teach people that's how they're allowed to treat you. It was time to stop teaching the wrong lessons. It was time to show my son and his wife what happened when they mistook kindness for weakness. For the next 2 weeks, I became a woman with a secret mission. Every conversation with Isabella was recorded. Every written demand was photographed and saved. Every witness to their treatment of me was quietly contacted and asked if they'd be willing to provide a statement if needed. The evidence piled up faster than I'd expected. Isabella had grown bolder, more demanding, as if my silence had convinced her that I'd fully accepted my new role as household staff. She started timing my tasks, critiquing my cooking, and giving me performance reviews like I was an employee on probation. Betsy, I need to talk to you about your breakfast presentation, she said one morning, standing in my kitchen with a notebook where she'd apparently been taking notes. The eggs were overcooked yesterday, and you forgot to warm the plates. If we're going to have paying guests, these details matter. I turned on the recording device in my pocket and asked, Isabella, can you remind me what my role is going to be when you start the bed and breakfast? Well, you'll be our head of hospitality services, she said, using the title she'd apparently invented to make servant sound professional. You'll handle all the cooking, cleaning, laundry, and guest relations. Harry and I will manage the business side, but the day-to-day operations will be your responsibility. And where will I be living? In the lovely basement apartment we're having built. It'll be perfect for you, private, but close enough that you can respond quickly if guests need anything during the night. During the night? Isabella nodded enthusiastically. Oh yes, full-service hospitality means being available 24/7. But don't worry, we don't expect you to handle everything alone. Harry and I will supervise to make sure standards are maintained. Supervise. In my own house, my son and his wife were going to supervise my work as their live-in servant. The recording device captured it all. But the most damning evidence came from a conversation I overheard between Isabella and her mother during one of their daily phone calls. Mother, you should see this place now, Isabella was saying, her voice carrying that entitled tone I'd grown to despise. I've completely transformed how things work here. Betsy was so disorganized before, but now she follows a proper schedule and maintains actual standards. I pressed record and moved closer to the living room where Isabella was pacing. No, she doesn't live in the master bedroom anymore. Harry and I needed that space for ourselves. She's much more comfortable in the smaller room, and it's better for everyone this way. A pause while her mother said something. Oh, the basement apartment isn't finished yet, but when it is, she'll love having her own private space. Plus, it makes sense from a business perspective. She needs to be accessible for guest services. Another pause. Of course she's paying for the renovations herself. Well, technically the trust is paying for them, but same thing. Harry made sure all the paperwork was handled properly. My blood went cold. Harry had been accessing the trust funds without my knowledge? Mother, you have to understand, Betsy doesn't really understand business. She thinks small. Harry and I are helping her see the bigger picture. This bed and breakfast could be incredibly profitable once we get it running properly. What about her catering business? Patricia asked, and I could hear her voice faintly through the phone. Isabella laughed. Oh, that's winding down naturally. Betsy realizes she can't manage both commitments properly, and frankly, the quality wasn't what it needed to be for our clientele anyway. It's better for everyone if she focuses on what she does best. What I did best. Serving her. The best part is that Betsy is finally understanding her role in all this. She was resistant at first, but once Harry explained that this was what was best for the family, she came around. She's actually quite good at following directions once she understands what's expected of her. Following directions. Like a trained pet. But the conversation that sealed Isabella's fate happened 3 days later, when she thought I was at the grocery store. I'd forgotten my shopping list and come back to get it when I heard Isabella talking to someone on a video call. Through the kitchen window, I could see her in the living room, laptop open, speaking to what looked like a business meeting. "Yes, we've completely restructured the household management," Isabella was saying to whoever was on the screen. "The previous owner was lovely, but had no sense of professional standards. We've implemented proper systems and accountability measures." Previous owner. She was talking about me like I was already gone. "The transition has been smoother than expected. Harry's mother has been very cooperative once she understood that this arrangement benefits everyone. She gets to stay in a home she's familiar with, and we get an experienced domestic worker who already knows the property intimately. Domestic worker. Not family. Not partner. Not even employee. Domestic worker. The financial structure is ideal," Isabella continued. "The property is held in a trust that Harry will inherit, so we're essentially managing our own asset while having live-in staff to handle operations. The profit margins are going to be incredible." The person on the screen said something I couldn't hear, and Isabella laughed. "Oh, she doesn't realize she could contest any of this. Harry handles all the legal and financial matters, and frankly, she's not sophisticated enough to understand her options anyway. She's just grateful to have a place to live and purpose in her life. Not sophisticated enough to understand my options. Grateful to have a purpose. The best part is the authenticity factor," Isabella went on. "Guests love the idea that their host has been in the house for decades, that she's cooking family recipes and sharing local history. It's like having a living museum piece as part of the experience." Living museum piece. That's when I knew that everything Alan had feared was coming true. Isabella didn't just want to use my house and my labor. She wanted to erase me as a person and turn me into a prop for her business fantasy. I called Robert Morrison that afternoon. "Robert, I'm ready to invoke the respect clause. I have recordings, photographs, witness statements, and documented financial manipulation. How quickly can we move forward?" "How quickly do you want to move forward?" Robert asked. "Immediately." 2 days later, I was sitting in Judge Patricia Williams' chambers, watching her review 2 weeks' worth of evidence. She was exactly what I'd expected from Alan's description: sharp, fair, and completely unimpressed by manipulation tactics. "Mrs. Coleman," she said after listening to the recordings, "this is one of the clearest cases of emotional abuse and financial exploitation I've seen. Your husband was very wise to include these protections in the trust." "What happens next?" I asked. "I'm ruling that the respect clause has been violated. The alternative distribution will begin immediately. You have 30 days to move your personal belongings, and then the property will be transferred to the Coleman Women's Transition Center." The Coleman Women's Transition Center. Alan had even picked the name. "Your financial settlement will be available within a week," Judge Williams continued. "It's enough to purchase a comfortable apartment and live independently for several years. There's also a separate business development fund if you want to expand your catering operation." I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Relief. Hope. And underneath it all, a deep gratitude to Alan for loving me enough to plan for this possibility. "Judge Williams, when do Harry and Isabella find out?" "That's up to you. You can tell them yourself, or you can have them served with formal notice. Either way, they'll need to vacate the property within 30 days. "I want to tell them myself," I said. "They should hear it from me." Judge Williams smiled. "I think your husband would approve of that choice." That evening, I cooked dinner for the last time in the kitchen Alan and I had shared for 30 years. I made Harry's favorite meal, the same comfort food I'd been serving him since he was a child. When Isabella came downstairs and saw the formal place settings, the candles, the special meal, she looked pleased. "This is lovely, Betsy. Are we celebrating something?" "In a way," I said. "I have some news to share with both of you." Harry appeared, looking tired from another day of unsuccessful job hunting. "What's the occasion, Mom?" I waited until they were both seated, until they'd taken their first bites of the meal I'd prepared with care, until they were relaxed and comfortable in what they thought was their dining room. Then I set my fork down and looked at my son and his wife. "I've been thinking about your bed and breakfast proposal," I said calmly, "and I've decided to decline." Isabella's smile faltered slightly. "Decline? Betsy, I thought we'd moved past that." I thought you understood that this arrangement works best for everyone. I do understand, I said. I understand that you want to turn my home into your business while I work as your servant. I understand that you think I'm not sophisticated enough to have options. I understand that you see me as a domestic worker and a museum piece rather than as family. The color drained from Isabella's face. I never said any of those things. I pulled out my phone and played the recording of her business call. Isabella's own voice filled the dining room, describing me as a domestic worker, dismissing my intelligence, and referring to me as a living museum piece. Harry stared at his wife in shock. Isabella, what is this? It's the truth, I said. It's who your wife really is when she thinks no one is listening. Isabella's composure cracked. You recorded me? That's illegal. Actually, it's not, I said calmly. And Judge Patricia Williams found it very enlightening when she reviewed it along with all the other evidence of how you've been treating me. Judge Williams? Harry asked, his voice barely a whisper. The successor trustee for the family trust your father set up, I explained. Alan was very concerned about protecting me from exactly this kind of situation. I pulled out the official papers Judge Williams had given me. She's ruled that you violated the respect and dignity clause of the trust. As of today, I'm no longer the property trustee. The house is being transferred to the Coleman Women's Transition Center. Isabella grabbed the papers, scanning them frantically. This can't be legal. Harry, you inherit this house. Your father wouldn't have done this. My father built in protections in case his son and daughter-in-law decided to treat me like hired help in my own home, I said. He was very thorough. Harry looked like he'd been punched. Mom, what does this mean? It means you have 30 days to find somewhere else to live, I said. It means the house will become a resource for women who are starting over after divorce, death, or other major life changes. It means Alan's legacy will be helping people instead of enabling cruelty. Isabella stood up so quickly her chair fell over. You can't do this. We gave up everything to be here. We planned our entire future around this house. You planned your future around exploiting me, I corrected. You gave up nothing. You came here because you needed help, and instead of being grateful, you decided to take over my life. Harry, say something, Isabella demanded. This is your inheritance. Your mother can't just give it away. Harry looked at me with tears in his eyes. Mom, I never wanted you to feel like a servant. I thought Isabella was trying to help. Help by putting me in the basement and making me available 24/7 for guest services? I asked. Help by sabotaging my catering business? Help by referring to me as unsophisticated domestic help? Harry turned to Isabella with an expression I'd never seen before. Is that really how you see my mother? Isabella's mask finally slipped completely. Harry, your mother is a lovely woman, but she doesn't understand business. She doesn't understand what it takes to succeed in today's world. I was trying to help her find a role that matched her abilities. Her abilities, Harry repeated slowly. You mean cooking and cleaning and serving you? I mean hospitality services, Isabella said desperately. It's a legitimate career path. In the basement of her own house, Harry said. I watched my son process what his wife had really been planning, saw the moment he understood what he'd allowed to happen. Isabella, Harry said quietly, pack your things. We're leaving tonight. Leaving? Harry, this is a misunderstanding. Your mother is being manipulated by lawyers who want to steal your inheritance. Harry stood up and looked at his wife like he was seeing her for the first time. My mother is protecting herself from people who wanted to steal her dignity. And I'm ashamed that I let it happen. He turned to me, his face full of regret. Mom, I'm so sorry. I got so caught up in Isabella's plans. I forgot who you are. I forgot who I'm supposed to be. For the first time in months, I saw my real son in his eyes. The boy I'd raised to be kind and fair. Not the man who'd been willing to let his wife treat his mother like a servant. Harry, I said gently, you have a choice to make. You can continue to choose Isabella's vision of success over basic human decency, or you can remember the values your father and I tried to teach you. Isabella looked between us, realizing she was losing control of the situation. Harry, if you choose her over me, over our marriage, over our future together, there's no coming back from that. Harry looked at his wife, then at me, then at the formal papers that showed how completely Alan had protected me from people who would exploit my love for my family. Isabella, he said finally, there was never really a choice to make. The next 30 days passed in a whirlwind of transformation that I never could have imagined. Isabella left that same night, throwing clothes into suitcases while making increasingly frantic phone calls to her family in New York. I heard her in the driveway, screaming into her phone about legal action, and elder abuse, and theft of inheritance. But when her father's lawyers reviewed the trust documents, they advised her that Alan's protections were ironclad and legally unassailable. "This is humiliating," she hissed at Harry during their final argument in what used to be our master bedroom. "My family will never understand how you let this happen. Your family never understood anything about my mother except that she wasn't rich enough to matter to them," Harry replied, his voice steady in a way I hadn't heard in months. Isabella's parting words to me were delivered through Harry. "Tell your mother she's destroyed our future and robbed you of your inheritance. Tell her I hope she's proud of herself." "Tell Isabella," I replied, "that she destroyed her own future the moment she decided respect was optional." Harry didn't leave with her. "Mom," he said after Isabella's car disappeared down our street, "I know I don't deserve it, but can I stay for a few days? I need to figure out what comes next, and I need to understand how I got so lost." For the first time in months, my son looked like himself again. Confused, hurt, but himself. "Of course," I said. "This is your home for as long as you need it to be." Over the next few weeks, Harry and I had the conversations we should have been having all along. About marriage and loyalty, about respect and boundaries, about what it means to honor your parents versus enabling abuse. "I thought I was being a good husband," Harry admitted one evening as we sat in the living room, talking like we used to before Isabella entered our lives. "I thought supporting Isabella meant agreeing with everything she wanted." "Supporting your spouse means helping them be their best self," I said, "not enabling them to be their worst." Harry nodded, his eyes red with the tears he'd been holding back for days. "She convinced me you were holding us back from success, that your way of doing things was keeping us from reaching our potential. And what do you think now?" Harry looked around the living room, taking in the family photos Isabella had wanted to remove, the comfortable furniture she'd called outdated, the handmade quilts she'd dismissed as amateur. "I think success that requires you to treat people badly isn't success at all," he said. "I think Dad would be ashamed of who I became these past few months." "Your father would be proud of who you're choosing to be now," I corrected. "Growth requires recognizing mistakes and doing better." As the month progressed, I watched the Coleman Women's Transition Center team prepare to take over the house. They were exactly the kind of people Alan would have loved: social workers, volunteers, and advocates who understood that sometimes people need a safe place to rebuild their lives. "Mrs. Coleman," said Dr. Sarah Chun, the center's director, "your husband's vision for this place is remarkable. We're planning to help women transition back to independence after divorce, domestic violence, or death of a spouse. This house will provide temporary housing while they get job training, find permanent housing, and rebuild their support systems." It was perfect. Alan's legacy would be helping women find their strength and independence, just like he'd helped me find mine. The financial settlement from the trust allowed me to purchase a beautiful 2-bedroom apartment above a commercial space in the downtown area. The ground floor became my new catering kitchen, a professional space with commercial equipment, storage for events, and a small dining area where I could host intimate dinners and cooking classes. Betsy's Kitchen opened 6 weeks after Isabella's departure, and the response was overwhelming. My church friends spread the word, my former catering clients came back, and new customers found me through word of mouth about my story. "You're an inspiration," said Margaret Torres, a recently divorced woman who hired me to cater her new job celebration dinner. "Hearing about how you stood up for yourself gave me courage to finally leave my marriage." That's when I realized Alan's plan had succeeded beyond anything he could have imagined. My story wasn't just about protecting my own dignity. It was becoming a beacon for other women who needed to remember their own worth. Harry found a job with a nonprofit organization that provided business consulting to small entrepreneurs. "It's not as much money as the marketing job would have been," he told me, "but it feels like meaningful work. Like I'm helping people build something real instead of just selling them dreams." He rented a small apartment across town and started attending counseling to understand how he'd lost sight of his values during his marriage. "The therapist says Isabella showed classic signs of manipulative behavior," Harry explained during one of our weekly dinners. "She isolated me from my support system, convinced me that my instincts were wrong, and gradually normalized treating you badly." "Do you miss her?" I asked. Harry was quiet for a long moment. I miss who I thought she was. But I'm starting to understand that the woman I fell in love with was a performance she put on until she felt secure enough to show her real personality. 3 months after the house transfer, Isabella made one final attempt to undo what she called the theft of Harry's inheritance. She hired a lawyer and filed a challenge to the trust, claiming Alan had been mentally incompetent when he created the respect clause. The challenge was dismissed within 2 weeks. Alan's medical records, the testimony of Robert Morrison and Judge Williams, and the detailed documentation of Alan's rational planning process made it clear that he'd been completely competent and extraordinarily prescient. Isabella's lawyer advised her that continuing the legal challenge would likely result in her being ordered to pay court costs and legal fees for all parties involved. That was the last we heard from her. 6 months after that devastating dinner conversation, I was standing in my new kitchen, preparing for the grand opening celebration of Betsy's Kitchen. The space was filled with friends, former clients, women from the transition center, and Harry, who'd become one of my biggest supporters. "Ladies and gentlemen," said Dorothy, my friend from church who'd become my unofficial marketing manager, "let's raise a glass to Betsy Coleman, who proved that it's never too late to choose dignity over convenience." As everyone applauded, I thought about Alan and how proud he would be of what his careful planning had made possible. The house we'd built together was helping other women rebuild their lives. The catering business I'd started in our kitchen had grown into something that provided both financial independence and deep personal satisfaction. And Harry had learned that real love requires respect, not submission. "Mom," Harry said, pulling me aside after the celebration wound down, "I have something to tell you." My heart clenched for a moment, worried that he was about to announce some new relationship or life change that might threaten our rebuilt closeness. "I've been thinking about what Dad would want his legacy to be," Harry continued, "and I've decided to establish a scholarship fund in his name, for women who are starting over and want to begin their own businesses." Tears filled my eyes. "Harry, that's beautiful. I want to use the money Isabella and I had saved for our down payment," he said. "It feels right to use it for something that would actually help people instead of just helping us accumulate more stuff." That evening, after everyone had gone home and I was cleaning up my beautiful new kitchen, I felt Alan's presence as strongly as I had on the day he died. Not the sadness of his absence, but the warmth of his love and the security of his protection. He'd been right to worry. He'd been right to plan. And most importantly, he'd been right to believe that I was strong enough to choose dignity over desperation when the time came. The Coleman Women's Transition Center thrived, helping dozens of women rebuild their lives. Betsy's Kitchen became a neighborhood gathering place where people came not just for food, but for the warmth and acceptance that reminded them they were valued. And sometimes, late at night when I was closing up the restaurant, I would catch my reflection in the windows and see a woman I was proud to be. Not the servant Isabella had tried to make me, not the victim I could have become, but the strong, independent woman Alan had always believed I could be. A woman who had learned that love without respect isn't love at all. It's just another form of exploitation. A woman who had discovered that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable other people's worst impulses. A woman who understood that dignity isn't something you're given. It's something you claim and protect, no matter what it costs. If you've stayed with me through this entire story, thank you. It means the world to me that people are willing to listen when women share their experiences of standing up for themselves. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt like your kindness was being mistaken for weakness, or if you know someone who needs to hear that they have more options than they realize, please share this story. Like it, comment about your own experiences with setting boundaries and demanding respect. Because here's what I learned. There are Isabellas everywhere, people who will take advantage of your generosity and mistake your love for weakness. But there are also Allens everywhere, people who believe you deserve respect and will help you protect it. The question is, which voice are you going to listen to? And remember, if you're in a situation where you're being pressured to accept less than you deserve, you have more power than you think. You have more options than they want you to believe. And you deserve better than anyone who would ask you to diminish yourself for their convenience. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for believing that women like me deserve dignity and respect. And thank you for understanding that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is walk away from people who refuse to value what you bring to their lives. Until next time, remember, You teach people how to treat you. Make sure you're teaching the right lessons.